Storytelling has been how we have conveyed information and wisdom. And we seem to have lost that in our busy era, where we're constantly listening to things or on the net or on the social media or watching news or something, that we listen to all that information, but we have a hard time processing it.
Hey, Uncommon Leaders, welcome back. This is the Uncommon Leader Podcast, and I'm your host, John Gallagher. I've got a great episode planned for you today. We're exploring a timeless and powerful tool that often gets overlooked in business and in leadership, and that's the power of storytelling. And our guide today in storytelling is Steve Mann, a global entrepreneur. He's a philanthropist, but also a mentor who understands the profound impact of sharing your personal story and the impact that it can have for generations to come. His new book, Stories That Shape Us, is a practical guide to passing down wisdom, love, and joy to the next generation. And I know that he believes in the power of stories. We've had some conversation before we even got started to connect families, to teach invaluable lessons for life, and create a lasting legacy. So, Steve, welcome to the Uncommon Leader Podcast. Great to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Doing great, and it's great to be here.
Well, I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'll start you off with the same first question that I ask all my first-time guests. And that's for you to tell me a story from your childhood that still impacts who you are today as a person or as a leader.
You know, that's actually kind of a hard question, because where do you start? There's so many stories. And that childhood and all those stories are what shaped me and what shape all of us. But maybe I could just tell one. I grew up on a farm in Idaho, potato farm. And I remember as a young boy, I just hated that. And I was out hoeing weeds around something, and I was getting mad at being out there. So I was whacking that hole all over and chopping things down, and up comes my dad in his pickup, and I thought, oh, I am in big trouble. And he gets out of his pickup, and he sits down with me by a standpipe, their big cement water device. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? And he starts telling me the story of the frog who fell into the milk. We've all heard this story. And rather than drown, he just kept going, and turned the milk into butter and jumped out. And what could have been, I guess, an explosive kind of situation with my dad turned into a terrific learning experience, because he told me a story and I listened. And obviously, that story has stayed with me for the last 70 years.
Those stories stay with you. Love that. And it leads right into the conversation about your book, right? And I love how those stories connect. I mean, I believe that I might learn just as much today going through this episode. And so my questions might sound a little bit almost selfish. So I hope the listeners really stay in touch with this as well, because I do think leaders are great storytellers, and that doesn't have to be that they are making those things up, but it's saving that up in wisdom. Now, your book, Stories That Shape Us, what was it about that book? Who did you write it for? And what was it about that book that you wanted folks to take away?
I have written this for parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, because I think we live in a world where kids and grandkids get so much of their information from the internet, from social media. And what they get is data. They get information, but they don't get the connections. They don't get the perspective that comes from a relative telling a story. So I wrote this in part to tell my own story to my own grandchildren, but also to try to teach others that you can do this. You can tell stories, and here's how you do it. I think we talk about food, and we talk about the weather, and we talk about sports, but we seldom talk about things that are important to us, values, principles, beliefs. And we usually don't know quite how to get into those, and stories make a great way to do that if we know how to use it. So,
Love that, Steve.
I really hope that people, as they go through the book, they learn how to tell their own stories. They learn how to pass on their wisdom and their love and they're a concern to the next generation, and that they have a fun time doing it.
We're going to get into some really cool stuff because you talk about the science of storytelling as well and the impact it can have and in terms of the memory. You talked about that a little bit just with your frog in the milk story and turn it into butter. See, I still remember that as well, and 70 years ago, and what the impact can have. But before we get into that, what do you see or what have you seen are some of the barriers that prevent people from sharing their stories or becoming a good storyteller?
I think too many people, if you ask them, tell me a story, no, I've never done anything important. And so I'll start saying things like, well, tell me when you were in college. What did you do there? And what do? They start telling me stories. Tell me about when you were growing up. And they start telling me stories. And so I kind of then turn around and say, see, you just told me about 5 stories. You do have them. You just don't think about it. So I encourage people to just go to different parts of their life and maybe say what happened here and then come up with some stories about it. The next thing they say is, these are important to me, but I can't sit down with a grandson and say, look, I've got a lecture on wisdom today. Well, you've just lost it there. But if you tell that grandson a story, then they're asking the questions. Maybe I could just share a story for that helped me, guide me to write this book. I was telling stories to my 7-year-old grandson about his uncles, my 2 youngest sons, who happen to be Black. And I was telling them about how their uncles would often be, not often, but periodically be followed home from school by the police because of their skin color. And he looked at me and said, that's dumb. Why would they do that? So that led to a discussion of prejudice and discrimination. And, it's not easy to explain something like that to a 7-year-old. But he was kind of fascinated and he didn't let it go. And the next morning, we were at breakfast with his parents and he brought it up again. And we ended up with quite a long discussion about prejudice and discrimination. And so it really taught me how a story can lead into a discussion of really important values and beliefs.
I love that. You can tie that back in again. It only took a story to generate the curiosity, and to have the curiosity of a 7-year-old, I'm sure, makes it even more interesting to tell that story. So I think that's one of the things that I see as a barrier is folks, they get it, as you said that, tell me about college or tell me about your high school days versus what do you do for a job? Well, that's different conversationally than tell me about something that's happened in your past. You emphasize the stories are more memorable than advice, and that might be part of it, right? Let me tell you about wisdom. What's the psychology behind that? Is there something that's there with regards to what you've learned that folks learn better from stories or parables than they do from advice?
I think it's kind of innate. You go to France and the caves and the cave paintings here, and about the oldest kind of communication we know. And what were they doing? They were trying to depict stories of the hunt and the hunter. Why? Because their survival depended on that. But even back then, they were using stories to try to convey wisdom and information to their children and hopefully sometimes grandchildren. And that has stayed with us in every culture that I know of. Storytelling has been how we have conveyed information and wisdom. And we seem to have kind of lost that in our busy era, where we're constantly listening to things or on the net or on the social media or watching news or something, that we listen to all that information, but we have a hard time processing it. We have a hard time putting it in perspective. And in listening to all that stuff, we've quit talking to each other. Think how many of us have somebody in our family who we don't talk to anymore because of differences on political issues. Um, I have this little group I meet with on Mondays, and it's people about my age, 70s and 80s. And we just have somebody come and talk, or you have somebody play the violin or something. So one day I said, you know, and by the way, this is a group of, they're engineers, nuclear physicists, geneticists. I said, what if we just took a topic of today's political world and had a discussion? No. No, we might offend somebody. We can't do that. We just got to do things. And so here's this group of people who I would really like to know their opinions on things and how they develop those opinions. And they're not willing to do that. Now, I'm hopeful when the book comes out, I can get them all a copy and say, okay, let's go to this chapter on talking about controversial issues. And
yeah,
I'll
let's
read
hear
that.
it. Come on. Because I know,
Yeah,
here's what I hear before you even tell the story. It's one,
Yeah.
this is the old wives' tale, is there's two things that you don't talk about at the dinner table, especially if there's alcohol involved, and that's religion and politics. So help me talk about those things without alcohol being involved and not getting anybody upset. Let's hear it,
Yeah.
Steve.
Well, I think the first thing is you need to set some ground rules. Since we don't do this all the time, now a strange experience, a different experience. And we usually go into things like that, and our determination is we're going to convert the other person. And so the first ground rule I say that we need to look at is the purpose isn't to convert. The purpose is to learn. Okay. And I think right off the bat, if two people or two groups agree that that's the purpose, all of a sudden it's easier. And we kind of monitor that as they go on. The next thing I say is the first thing we got to do is ask questions and listen. And when we're listening, it isn't to come up with the argument, it's to understand. Well, those are just a few of the ground rules, but I think if we could just do those two things, we could end up in some productive discussions.
Hey, Uncommon Leaders. Hope you're enjoying the episode so far. I believe in doing business with people you like and trust and not just a company name. That's why a strong personal brand is essential, whether you're an entrepreneur or a leader within a company. Brand Builders Group, the folks who have been helping me refine my own personal brand, are offering a free consultation call with one of their expert brand strategists. They'll help you identify your uniqueness, craft a compelling story, and develop a step-by-step plan to elevate your impact. So head on over to coachjohngallagher.com/BBG, as in Brand Builders Group, to schedule your free call and take the first step toward building a personal brand that gets you noticed for all the right reasons. That's coachjohngallagher.com/BBG. Now, let's get back to the episode. Love that. Stay curious. I had a friend who advised me one time when reading a book. He says, don't read a book to agree or disagree with the book. Read a book to learn. And then that second component you're talking about, you get asked questions, but they're not questions like, well, why would you say something like that? It's in this form of a clarifying, non-leading a question. So tell me more about this, or what did you mean by this when you said it? And then the tone. But yeah, I agree, Steve. If we could just follow those two rules in storytelling, we would be able to talk about those things at the table. Absolutely.
You know, I think our whole society is built toward polarization. If we go on the internet, the algorithms force us to one side, and pretty soon all we're hearing is further and further out. And they don't bring us to the middle to try to understand. And so we have tended to pick that up in our personal lives. And you can see what that's doing to our country. We see what that does to our families. So I think it's really critical that we learn how to talk. You know, I had a just terrific professor in graduate school. And one of the things he had us do is we would take his class and we'd take 1 week and hear all the positive sides of a topic like environmentalism. Then we hear all the negatives and we debate it. Then we move to a new topic, all the cons, all the pros, and then debate. And at the end of the class, I sat down with him and he said, what'd you like? What do you think of the class? I said, well, I love the class. Yeah, it was invigorating, but I also kind of hated it. He said, well, why is that? I said, because I love being passionately devoted to a cause. And when I understand both sides, it's harder to do that. And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, Steve, that's the role of the educated person, to try to keep both sides from killing each other while you help them work towards solutions. And that just stayed with me my whole life.
Another story. There you go, Steve. Still telling stories as to how things work. Steve, help me become a better storyteller. What are some of the key elements then of a story that make it effective? So you talked about the ground rules before you get started, but what makes up a good story that is memorable, and especially again in the context of parenting, grandparents, that one that stays for generations?
Well, I think the first thing is just to start. You don't have to start with a story that has a big moral behind it. You don't have to start with some complicated story. Kids just like anything. In fact, that's kind of how I got into it. I was reading books, children's books to grandkids, ran out. They said, well, tell us something about you, Grandpa. So I kind of, okay. So I started telling stories of growing up. And they loved it. I couldn't believe it. It didn't have to have a moral, didn't have to have anything to follow it. They just loved hearing the stories. And I think part of that was they could make connections between me and my life and them. And that helped them get perspective and a sense of belonging. So the first thing I'd say is just start. It could be silly. It could be hard. It could be a failure. It doesn't have to be anything. Just tell the story and enjoy it. And tell some stories like that and have fun and ask them to tell their stories. And then maybe somewhere along the line, you'll see the chance to talk about that a little deeper. Or one of the kids may ask you a question. Well, why did that happen? And now you're into a conversation. Mm-hmm. And that's really what I would like to see happen, is to see grandparents, parents in meaningful conversations with their children.
As you say that, Steve, again, there's some things that come to my mind as we were sharing before we get started. My dad has passed away recently, and while we were there, we got to go through some bins of photos that were there. And, every one of those photos has a story, but the one that touched us the most actually was actually a box he had from his father that we had never seen before. And we opened it up, and my grandfather had passed away when I was just a year old, over 50 years ago. We opened that up, and it was a box full of stories. It was his wallet from that he was carrying the week he passed away, and a driver's license with no photo, and the different membership cards that he had, the different, and I'm just imagining kind of that. And, these things that we have right here that we carry around every day have got photos inside of them that are stories just waiting to be told. Because the photo itself is a reminder, but the story that goes along with it is what really starts to be powerful.
We do kind of the same thing. I'm looking at it over here. We've got a Knicks play, and that's just a screen.
Oh yeah.
Like this.
Yep.
And pictures go through it, and it's got thousands and thousands of pictures on it now.
Mm-hmm.
And when the grandkids are here, they get locked in front of that. And then they're shutting it off and asking us, well, what's happening here? What's going on? And I shouldn't just say the grandkids. It turns on if you walk by it with a motion sensor. And I walk by at night turning lights off, and all of a sudden it goes on, and I get stuck. And I'm there for the next, hour watching these pictures and thinking of things that happened. And and you say, why? I think, again, because it gives us connections. It's one thing to get a piece of data. It's a whole different thing to connect with that data. Say, I understand it. My grandfather had a similar thing. He went through that. Maybe I can too.
Those stories are so powerful. And you touched on this again from generations to come. What's some advice that you have as well? Like, these stories are being told. Like, how do you capture those stories that you can continue to pass them down?
I have a interesting process I sometimes go through. And when I started to write the book, I didn't have a list of stories. But when I would think about it at night, then I go to sleep. And I guess your brain processes things when you're asleep. Invariably, I'd be up at 3 o'clock writing down or sending myself messages, emails to myself. Remember when this happened? Remember when this happened? I had a friend, a neighbor, who was telling me some stories about growing up in Las Vegas in the 50s. And Las Vegas was very segregated then. And when he was about 16, his dad sent him over to work in his uncle's laundry. They did laundry for the hotels. And this laundry was in the black section of town, and he was the only white kid there. And he had this boss who he really didn't like. And he felt he was lazy and didn't do anything. And after several years there, his boss said, "Could you give me a ride home?" Okay, didn't like the idea, but he did it. And then it was, "Well, could you pick me up?" I didn't like that either, but he did it. And then he said, "Well, could you kind of honk here so I don't have to get up any earlier when you get here?" He's thinking, "You lazy guy." Finally, he gets talking to him and finds out that he got married in high school, and he and his wife both work 2 jobs. His kids are now just about to start college, but he works 2 full-time jobs, and he doesn't know how to read or write. But he has learned how to get people to do things, so he was promoted and promoted. And all of a sudden, his whole attitude changed. And I said, "Have you written this down anywhere?" I said, No. He says, "Who cares?" I said, "You know what? Sometime out in the future, your great-grandson, who you don't know, might pick up this story, and he's reading about his grandfather, great-grandfather. He's going, wow, I never thought of that." And that would give him a whole new perspective. And he looks at me and goes, "You're right. It could. I'll go home and write that down this afternoon." Anyway, I think we underestimate the power that our stories can have with future generations.
So cool. Writing it down. If we just think about that, I mean, having prompts or whatever that is to help us out, to get us through.
And you don't have to write down the whole story. Just write down, it was about this. And inevitably, when you do that, an hour later, you think, well, this happened when they did this, or this happened, and pretty soon you have a story.
Steve, your book is gonna be out. Folks are gonna read it. They're gonna put it on a bookshelf, just like the one that's behind me. After they read it, a year later, they're gonna see the binder of that book sitting on the shelf still. When they see that binder a year later after they've read your book, what do you want them to think, and what do you want for them to have done after reading your book?
The book is kind of put together like a workbook. There's probably some 50 stories, 60 stories of my life, and they illustrate 14 different principles, traits, or beliefs. And as they go through those, they learn how to connect stories with a trait or a belief. But after every story, I ask them to write down, what does this bring to mind? What are your thoughts? What are your stories? After every trait or belief, I have a list of things that they could do if they wanted to study further and to write that down. And so I hope as they go through this, they end up with a resource book to tell stories for a long, long time. In fact, I hope they end up with their basic resources to write their own book if they want to, that they could leave with their great-grandchildren. So I hope when they see that up on your bookshelf there, they'll see that spine and think, you know what, I was going to do that. I need to get back to, I need to tell some stories. I need to jot down my history.
Steve, I think that's great. And I think it's something, again, it's as simple as writing it down, and it's as complex as, well, it's easier to have it in a picture in the next play that you, and I know what frame you're talking about because my mom has the same one, and we'll upload photos to her because she lives so far away that we keep her informed as to what's happening in our life. But writing that down, the power of writing it down so that it lasts and can be read into the future is so powerful as well. A picture makes you kind of make it up, but having that story written down can be really cool. Steve, I want folks to stay in touch with you and learn more about your book. So where can they go to find that information?
We have a new website, and it's Steve, STEVE -Mann, .com. And on that website, we've put a picture of the book. We put how you can find out about it, where it is, further developments that have happened, how to reach me. And so you'll be able to find all of that on the website. You'll also be able to find it on Instagram or any of the basic social media places, because we have information on those also.
Great. Steve, I've enjoyed our conversation today. I'm going to give you the last word here and with one final question, but I want to let you know you've inspired me, and now I got to go and start writing those down. So when I get a copy of your book in my hands, it's going to be something that's important for me to be able to pass those stories down generation to generation, how important that it is. Thank you for adding value to the listeners of the Uncommon Leader podcast. Your last question from me is, I'm going to give you a billboard. You can put it wherever you want to. That's not the question in terms of where you're going to put it, but I'm going to let you put whatever message you want to on that billboard. What's the message that you put on that billboard, and why do you put that message on there?
You know, I often do talks with young men, young women, leadership camps, things like that. And there's two things I really try to stress. One is to dream dreams. And at first, they don't know what you're talking about. And so they usually tell me the things they think I want them to say. And I push it and say, no, what are you really imagining up there? And keep a hold of that. Don't let anybody drive that out of you. You know, I have a pacemaker right here. Somebody dreamed that up. And if they hadn't dreamed it up, I wouldn't be here. And all of the developments in our society have come because somebody had dreams. So the first thing I say is dream dreams and pay attention to them and follow them. The second thing I say is do something. Do something to get you a little closer. Just take a little action. Just make one little step toward making that happen. And if you dream the dreams and take action, you're going to have a wonderful time and make a difference.
Great advice, Steve. Great words of wisdom. I wish you the best in the book. I wish you the best in the future as well with leaving a legacy with your family. I'm sure that your storytelling skills are going to be ones that go down for generations to come. Thank you so much for adding value to the Uncommon Leader podcast today.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.